Endurance Junkie Podcast, episode 115. Hey Junkies, how are you doing? My name is Peter and thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Endurance Junkie Podcast, the show where I will be interviewing some of the fastest, smartest, and most inspiring people active in the endurance world today. Now, if you like these little interviews and don't want to miss any future episodes, just head over to iTunes or Stitcher and simply subscribe to the show. Also, feel free to join me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you want to discuss or leave your comments. My handle is @Junkie Podcast on all platforms, so it should be nice and easy for us to connect. Alright, Andy Blow is the founder and CEO of Precision Hydration. Now, Andy has a degree in sports and exercise science, and he was once the team sports scientist for the Benetton Renault F1 teams. He founded Precision Hydration to help athletes solve their hydration issues after finding out late in his own athletic career that his performance has been held back by hydration issues caused by his extremely salty sweat. Now, he has a few top 10 Ironman and 70.3 finishes to his name, as well as an Xterra World Age Group title. But these days, Andy regularly competes in endurance adventure events such as the Utilo Swim Run World Championships. So hi Andy, thanks for coming on the show. Now, for those of us who don't know you, can you start off by telling us a bit about yourself and your own sporting background growing up in the UK and your career in endurance sports?
Sure, and thanks for the invite for coming on the show, Peter. So I started out like a lot of kids in the UK playing soccer and football. That was my main sport until it was in my early teenage years, and I always did some cross country running and a little bit of swimming. A lot of the time, my dad encouraged me to do that to stay fit for the team sports, and I think I probably showed more talent for running without a ball at my feet than with a ball at my feet. So eventually moved out of soccer and team sports and focused a bit more on endurance stuff. And I don't think I had a huge talent for it, but I enjoyed it and was pretty persistent at training for it. And I did some swim run races, saw the older guys doing triathlon with the bikes and wanted to get involved in that. So my dad got me a cheap road bike, and it just snowballed from there. I really got into the sport, organically over a few years, and then kind of accelerated when I went to the University of Bath to study sports science. And at the time, the University of Bath was just setting itself up as a training centre of excellence for triathlon. So I had access to some great coaches, some great training partners, and that really pushed me on a lot.
Yeah. So when you started, it was like the early 90s. How was the triathlon scene in the UK at that time? Because it was a relatively young sport. Yeah,
it was quite a weird thing, I guess, for a young teenage lad to be doing. There weren't many of us doing it. It was kind of tiny little events with 100 or 200 people in them that happened early on a Sunday morning. I was a member of Leicester Triathlon Club, which was one of the more established triathlon clubs at that time, but I guess it probably had 20 or 30 members in total. We used to swim together once a week and do a group bike ride at the weekend. So it was a really niche little scene, of people kind of running around in Speedos and doing strange stuff on a weekend. And it's amazing to see where that's all gone now in the last 20 odd years. It's exploded.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about your progression in the sport? Because you went to a certain elite level.
Yeah, at university I trained under a couple of key coaches, a guy called Chris Jones, who was involved with the British Triathlon setup for a while, and Richard Hobson, who was coaching at Bath, and along with Paul Newsome, who's the founder of a company called Swim Smooth. Now, he and I were training partners and really pushed ourselves and took ourselves from, I guess, being like regional, national level juniors to both racing internationally. I went on and did some more long distance stuff and got some top tens in a few Ironman races and a podium at 70.3. I won my age group at an Xterra World Championships one year. So I was racing at a good level, but not truly professional. I raced in the pro start for a lot of these races and made a little bit of money off prize money here and there, but it was always second. I always had to work to support my triathlon habit, really.
Yeah. Was it something specific that you think that that stopped you from reaching that true elite level? Was it just that extra talent that you missed, or?
Yeah, it's funny looking back. I think I could have. Like everyone, I spec things. I think I could have done better with the knowledge that I've got now in hindsight. Mm-hmm. I think I trained very, very hard. So I don't feel like I left anything on the table in terms of how hard I could have trained, but almost I actually potentially overtrained and trained too hard some of the time. That would have been something that hindered me, because I think I got ill and injured more than I should have done, which I think is a common theme for athletes that are highly motivated and maybe not able to keep a lid on on that side of things so well. Yeah,
maybe because you guys were also looking at the elites at the time, that they've Scots and all that stuff who were doing like massive amounts of volume.
Definitely.
And I think for those true elites that might work, but for the weekend warriors, or maybe the guys who were just below that level, that might not have been the right approach.
Yeah, I think also there was a lot less access to good information about things like diet and nutrition and recovery and stuff, because the web was only the information on the web was very sparse, and access to it wasn't as good as it is now. So I think that you were training much more isolated in a bubble. You could get advice from local coaches and other athletes, but I think one thing athletes have access to nowadays is, potentially you could argue they've got information overload, but they've certainly got access to a much broader amount of information to help themselves manage their training and performance a bit better.
Yeah, that's an all different topic, with there's too much information there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you already touched on the subject. You went to Bath University and you got a degree there in sports science. Where did that interest come from? And then taking it to where you are today, what developed your interest in hydration and battling cramping?
Well, sports science was quite relatively a young course at the time when I applied for it, and it was as simple as the fact that I wanted to be an elite athlete. I was interested in sport, and I had the blinkers on. My parents were quite keen on me exploring, physiotherapy or medicine or kind of things which could have a sports angle, but are more of a vocational career or a professional career. But I was just dead set that it was going to be sport or nothing. I had no idea what I'd do with the qualification when I finished, but I just wanted to be involved in sport at some level. So that was kind of what pushed me into it. And then I was really lucky in the course that I did at university that we got to go and do a year of working in an industrial placement. So you applied for a year-long placement with a company working in sports science, and I got accepted to go and work with a Formula One racing team called Benetton, who have now become Renault in more recent years. And I got to work with with a whole load of elite athletes there, racing drivers and other people that were that the team was contracted to look after. So that got me a leg up and a foot in the door in the kind of sports science industry at a time when there weren't a lot of jobs. And my interest in hydration and performance actually came from a little bit of the stuff that we did with drivers, because they battle a lot of heat stress and a lot of sweat loss in the car, but also the majority of the interest came from my own battles with hydration, hyponatremia, electrolyte loss, racing in hot environments like in Kona and in Phuket in Thailand and in the Middle East.
No, that's not a bad place to start your career, working for an F1 team.
Yeah, it was great fun.
I can imagine. I think I remember an image. I think it was Nigel Mansell after winning the Monaco Grand Prix. I don't know what year it was, but he was like completely dehydrated and he needs to be helped to get on the podium to receive his trophy. So I can definitely imagine that these guys lose a lot of fluid during a race.
Yeah, but Malaysia is often the one that gets talked about the most because it's so hot and humid, and these guys fly in and fly out of these places so quick. They often don't get a chance to acclimatise very well. Mm-hmm. It is. I think driving it, although it's I'm not going to lie, it's not like doing an Ironman. You know, driving an F1 car is still a very, very physically, mentally taxing experience, and getting your nutrition, hydration, and fitness on point is a big deal.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you were able to improve there in that F1 team?
A lot of the time early on, it was I went in, I think, with grand thoughts that we'd be writing periodized training programs and doing stuff very scientifically, and we did use a fair amount of science, but often it was lifestyle management. It was teaching the guys who, you know, kind of young guys who were the similar age to me at the time, in their early 20s, earning millions of dollars and in salaries, and with a very fast lifestyle, but teaching them that, you know, getting up at the right time in the morning, getting some easy exercise done, staying on top of their immune system so they didn't get sick, so that keeping them so that they were eating properly. It was kind of putting the basics in place was a lot of what we were doing in terms of lifestyle management, because once you get someone fit and healthy, you can really build on their performance. But first and foremost, you've got to keep them fit and healthy.
So that was really like the start of actually building the professional race driver?
Yeah, I think Benetton back in the day then was one of the first teams to have a full-time sports science setup. There was myself as a sports scientist. We had a human performance manager. We had a doctor and a physio who were all, you know, looking after the drivers. And that was relatively unique at the time. More teams have it now, obviously, but back then they were quite early movers in that space.
Yeah, okay. Let's take it a bit further down the road and bring it to Precision Hydration, the company that you started. Was it like 7 years ago now?
Yes, 2011 we started.
Yeah. So where did that idea come from, and how did you tackle that project?
Well, in a lot of races I did that were very hot, I would often fade and my performance would suffer, and quite often I'd suffer with a lot of very, very bad muscle cramping. And for a long time I put that down to just being a person who didn't cope well in the heat. And then eventually I did some reading and got interested in the idea of salt loss and in sweat, because there was this often talked about link between salt loss and cramping. I approached a friend of mine who was a doctor, a guy called Dr. Raj Jutli, and he said, well, I've seen you at these races and you've got salt all over your skin. We should get a sweat test done and find out if you lose a lot of salt, and then maybe look at what you're drinking and eating. And so we tried it, and he said, I bet you're going to be a guy who loses a lot of salt. And I didn't even know at the time that there were differences between people. So we looked at it. He was right. I lose a hell of a lot of salt in my sweat, more than most people. I sweat a lot as well. I have a very high sweat rate. And he just worked with me a little bit to establish a more aggressive supplementation regime for electrolytes and sodium when I was racing. And for me, it was like night and day. It was a complete overnight game changer in terms of my performance, recovery, cramping. It was a huge deal. And I think, having solved that for myself as an athlete, I parked it for a few years because it was just something I'd learned, and, you know, you move on. But then when I stopped racing quite so seriously in 2006, 2007, I started implementing sweat testing and trying to customize hydration strategies with the athletes that I was coaching and working with. And that proved to be quite successful. And then, you know, it's just one of those things, one thing leads to another, and we keep refining it, trying to make it better. And eventually it grew arms and legs and became a business, which is where we are today.
Yeah. So talking a bit more about that sweat test, is that something that you only have to do once? And the sweat rate that you have and the amount of salt that you lose in your sweat, is that somehow genetically determined, or does that change according to the conditions that you're in?
It's a good question, and it's one which hasn't got a really specific answer. We would tend to say to most people most of the time that, look, the biggest factor that controls your sweat output in terms of your sodium concentration in your sweat is genetics. Things like your diet, your state of heat acclimatization, and other things can exert an influence, and they can shift it up and down a bit. But for the most part, I think most athletes, if they have a sweat test in conditions that are normal for them, then they probably only need to do it once, and that gives them a very good indication of what their levels of loss are. So we've repeat sweat tested a lot of athletes over the last 6 or 7 years, and although the numbers fluctuate from time to time. It's very rare to see a number change dramatically, so it doesn't really have a meaningful impact in terms of how they would change their hydration strategy dramatically.
Okay. So if you have an athlete that lives and races mainly in the UK, and he qualifies for Kona, which is a completely different climate, that doesn't really change?
Not so much in terms of the sweat composition in what we've seen. He will obviously change dramatically in terms of the amount that they sweat, because in a hot, humid environment, you will undoubtedly sweat a great deal more, and that gets factored into any plan. Mm-hmm. But it's the sweat composition tends to be a more genetic signature, and more of a stable reading.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how'd you go about then personalizing the hydration strategy for your athletes?
What we tend to do is look at all of the things that contribute to their sweat loss and therefore their hydration requirements. So the big ones are, we get a measurement of their sweat sodium composition if we can, which means for us, we have an exercise-free test. We put some electrodes on somebody's arm. We stimulate the sweat glands, we extract a sweat sample and test it, and that process takes about 30 minutes. And it was originally developed for cystic fibrosis diagnostics, so it's a very accurate test. We can then either take some measurements through measuring their body weight pre and post exercise, or take an estimate of their sweat loss. And then we look at their training volume, we look at the ambient conditions, we look at the distances that they're racing at, the intensity and the time. And with all of those things, we have a little algorithm that we can punch some numbers into, and it gives us a kind of ballpark idea on how much electrolyte replacement they might need, if they need any at all, and how much fluid, what kind of range of fluid intake they should start with. And then the key thing is we then refine that with some real world testing and trial and error with an athlete to actually dial it in.
Okay. So, and what products do you have then with precision hydration that can help?
We have a range basically of either 0 calorie or very low calorie hypertonic electrolyte drinks that come in 4 different strengths. So I think the easiest way to describe it is that the current sports drink market offers people a medium size, whatever they need, whereas we offer a small, medium, large and an extra large, and we try to fit the person to the most appropriate drink.
Yeah. And when people are racing, then should they be alternating like the high calorie drinks with the electrolyte drinks, or how does that work in reality?
In general, we recommend getting the majority of your fluids and electrolytes from your bottles, and the majority of your calories from your pockets. So in terms of fuel, in terms of gels or bars and things, there are exceptions to that. I know some athletes that race very well with high calorie liquids, but the problem is, I find, especially in hot conditions, is as the fluid requirement and the electrolyte requirement goes up, if you try to put calories in with that as well, the amount of volume of sugary or high calorie liquid you need to consume can cause a lot of GI issues. And we know that a lot of athletes in long distance races, especially in the heat, suffer GI issues based purely on a large amount of experience. We tend to find that if you put what we call hypotonic drinks in the bottle, so those with a very low or either zero or low carbohydrate content, and drink those appropriate to your needs and eat more solid foods, the way the stomach and the gut handles that tends to be more sympathetic, and you get less GI issues.
Yeah, I was going to address that as well, because a lot of these stuff is really sugary, and at a certain point in time, your stomach just can't handle it no more. The drinks that you guys have, like the electrolyte drinks, does that come in salty flavors as well, or? They're
all a very, very mild citrusy flavour, but they have 4 different strengths of sodium in there. So basically, we've got one right down at 250, which is about half the strength of a regular sports drink, and our strongest one is 1500 milligrams per litre, which is like 3 times the strength of a regular drink. And we've found that the 1000 one that we do in the 1500, the 2 strongest ones, are very popular with Ironman and ultra distance athletes in hot conditions. They seem to really tick the box for a lot of people who are going to long hot races.
Yeah, okay. What about the how would you say it? When should people drink? Should they drink to thirst, or should they drink to a schedule that they have written before the race?
Yeah, that is a fantastically sort of meaty topic, because there's, as I'm sure you're aware, people like, and a lot of this was started by Dr. Tim Noakes, who wrote a book called Waterlogged around 2012, which was all about, principally about the avoidance of hyponatremia. And hyponatremia is the problem of overhydration, where athletes drink too much relative to what they're sweating out, and end up diluting their blood sodium levels down to a point that can make them very ill, and in some cases you can die from it. So I think Tim Noakes became aware of that many years ago and started to study it and look into it, and he wrote Waterlogged as a sort of response to help the endurance sports world prevent these preventable deaths from hyponatremia. And his suggestion, his bottom line in that book is really, all you need to do to prevent hyponatremia and maximise your performance is drink to thirst. So your body's got the theory being your body's got these built-in mechanisms that monitor fluid volumes and blood salt levels, and as long as you just keep drinking a little bit of water when you feel thirsty, your body will sort itself out. And I'm really on the fence with this, because on one hand I like to endorse what he's saying, because being intuitive and listening to your body, and for a lot of athletes, especially in short races and when they're not sweating a lot, just drinking some water is absolutely fine. It's probably the best thing to do for performance, because he's right, your body can self-regulate, and if you're good at listening to thirst, then you will manage it pretty well. On the flip side, though, when you start to get into longer and hotter events, when you start to work with people like we do who have very high sweat losses and very high sodium losses, we've found that, frankly, just saying to them, right, we'll just drink water to thirst is a recipe for disaster, because sometimes their thirst cues, they're not very good at reading them, because, for instance, if you take a novice athlete who's racing an Ironman for the first time, they're thinking about so many things when they're out on the bike, their pacing and the tactics and the nerves and excitement. Like, actually tuning in and listening to your body's thirst cues and managing them very, very accurately is quite a tough thing to do. We probably wouldn't expect that athlete to be able to execute fantastic pace judgment without any external feedback. So we see a lot of scenarios, especially as events get longer and hotter, where you have a strategy or a kind of a framework for a hydration strategy, i.e. I'm going to drink roughly between X and Y per hour with X and Y amount of electrolytes or carbs or whatever in it. But then you're making some judgment calls on the day. So it's never going to be, right, I'm going to drink this amount per hour, whatever happens, irregardless of what my body tells me. But neither is it just a straightforward, right, I'm just going to get on the bike and drink when I'm thirsty. Because for a lot of people but those two rigid scenarios don't result in optimal performance. I think there's a middle ground. It's not either drink to thirst or drink to a rigid schedule. It's like, have a framework and a schedule so you understand what the likely requirements are, but then use some common sense and some intuition on the day in order to get it right. That's what elite athletes are fantastically good at, is blending those two approaches to come up with something that works for them on a given day.
Yeah, I guess they know their body best, and they can definitely read the symptoms.
Definitely.
So precision hydration was mainly founded because a lot of people are cramping during hot and humid conditions. A couple of months ago, I talked on a podcast with Professor Paul Lorsten about also performance in hot conditions, and he talked about tricking the brain by drinking the fluids in like an ice slushy form. Is that something that you would recommend as well?
Yeah, it's definitely got some efficacy to it. There's been studies done which have shown that can help you reduce your core temperature or reduce the brain's perception of your core temperature, and then allow you to push a bit harder. The biggest barrier to that, in my experience, is a logistical one, because obviously getting hold of a ice slushy when you're on the move in an event, unless you're in a situation where you've got a team car handing you bottles or something like that, is quite tough. What we often recommend to athletes in very hot conditions is to use quite a bit of water. If they've got free access to water so they've got as much as they need to drink, but have access to more, then actually just like pouring cold water on yourself, so that evaporates off, so you don't have to lose more fluid in sweat, and help to keep your core temperature down is also a very useful tactic. So I think there's a lot of sense in that.
Yeah. Let's take it to the other side of the spectrum. How important is hydration when it's cold out? What should you do in those conditions, and can precision hydration help there as well?
Well, I think if you're talking about sort of regular training in the cooler conditions, then generally speaking, sweat rates are reduced unless you're overdressed, and so hydration requirements scale down appropriately. Where we've just had a very interesting experience is working with some guys who went to Norway to do some cross-country skiing, pulling very heavy loads, like expedition type work, and they used the precision hydration 1500 mixes for two main reasons when they were pulling these sledges in at night. One was because in the cold you often lose more fluid than you do in temperate conditions because you pee more, because you get something called cold diuresis, which affects the kidneys, and you actually end up weeing more than you normally would. Mm-hmm. And also in cold and at altitude, when you're working hard, you lose a lot of fluid through your expired for your breathing. You breathe out a lot of humid air, and that dries you out. So they use the 1500 precision hydration products in order to help their body retain more of the fluid they drink, because the more sodium you put in a drink, the more it holds it in the bloodstream, and the less you tend to wee out. So and also they're having to melt snow water to get fluid, so they have to be very frugal with it. The other like slightly strange but useful benefit to them was that it was so cold that water was freezing in camelbacks and tubes and bladders and things. But if they put electrolytes and salts in it, it would change the freezing point of the water, so it wouldn't freeze up in their bottles, which was kind of a very secondary but a useful benefit.
Okay. What happens if you take too much electrolytes? Can that hurt performance, or does that just get evacuated through in your sweat and your urine, for example?
Yeah, largely, I would say, without being blasé about it, I think for athletes in hot conditions in long events, taking a little bit more than you might need is better than underdoing it. But that's a dangerous thing to say to athletes, because if you say to athletes take more rather than less, often they'll take vastly more. And the problem is, if you take vastly more of especially salts, you can feel quite sick. You can get a very dry mouth and feel thirsty, and that can be a problem if people are popping like loads and loads of salt tablets, for instance. So although we do have our own version of salt capsules and tablets, which we use in situations where mixing and carrying drinks is difficult, I think one thing that's good to do is always have a bottle of electrolytes and a bottle of water available if you can, so you can use your taste buds. And when the salty taste of the electrolytes is good, it's probably your body telling you it needs a bit more salt. And when actually the plain water tastes good, it's a counterbalance to keep your level of dilution where it should be. So a little bit of adjustment on the go with listening to your taste buds is a good way to help balance that out. But to go back to your sort of original point there, what happens if you take too much? I think largely the kidneys are pretty good at excreting excess. That's not to say you want to just throw more and more and more in the system to get them to deal with it, but your kidneys can process a lot of salt if they need to.
Yeah. Okay, now it's a pretty good advice to use both just water and electrolytes and balance it out with the taste buds. It's a really clever way of finding that balance. We talked a lot about your hydration during races and longer events, but how important is your hydration when, for example, the only thing you have on your training schedule today is a 60-minute easy swim?
Well, I think with most people who are drinking to thirst on a day-to-day basis, there's a lot of studies that show that your hydration status is probably maintained within 1 or 1.5% plus or minus, optimal on a daily basis. Anyway, as long as you're drinking normally and you've got access to fluids, and a 60-minute easy training session is not. It's going to create some sweating and increase dehydration a little bit, but it's not going to have a really catastrophic and detrimental effect. So our advice to most people on days when they're training lightly would just be drink a little bit more water or sports drink as you feel you need to, and that is about as technical as you need to get. It gets a little bit more intricate when you're training 2 or 3 times a day, or you're in a very high training volume phase, because you might get through the first session of the day being a little bit underhydrated, and get to the end and be okay there. But you can get kind of a stepwise dehydration that occurs if you're not staying on top of it. So sometimes we'd get people, for instance, we'd advise them to drink a little bit more in a 60-minute swim session first thing in the morning if they're going out and doing a 3-hour bike ride later on, because they're kind of making sure that they're topped up for later rather than just to get through that session.
Yeah, so it really becomes important when you have 2-3 hours a day.
Yeah.
Okay. How important is post-race hydration? I mean, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see there? And yeah, we've got some tips that people should be looking at.
I think that, I mean, I've definitely been guilty in the past of, after the race, you just kind of switch off and do whatever the hell you like because you feel like you've earned it. And to a degree, that's fine. If you've done a big race and you don't have to recover quickly, you can do whatever you want to rehydrate afterwards, and it might take you a day or two longer to recover overall, but does that really affect anything? Not really. I think where it's much more important is if you're in a phase where you're, say, racing weekly or even more frequently than that, or you're racing a small race before a big race, and at that point then jumping on getting your hydration sorted out along with getting enough energy and enough sleep and recovery, and immediately after the race, is really important. And there's a very strong association between the amount of sodium that you put in a drink and the amount that's retained in the body when you drink it. And all of the papers that have been written on rehydration recovery suggest that a strong sodium-based electrolyte drink will be absorbed and retained in the body much, much better in the hours immediately following exercise than not. So that's why we sometimes recommend, for athletes to have an extra bottle of the strong electrolyte drink like the pH 1500 in the hour or two after they finish, because it just accelerates the recovery a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so you just cross that finish line and have a good beer first of all, and then some electrolytes. Would that work?
Definitely, yeah. Always got to have the celebratory beer.
Good stuff. All right, thanks for your wisdom, Andy. It's much appreciated. I think got a lot of good stuff there for the audience. Yeah, we talked a bit off air about your own sporting achievements in the past. Are there some stuff that you still want to accomplish in the future? I mean, you still train a bit. You said you've got some races on some bucket list races, maybe.
Definitely, I've got really into the sport of swim run in the last few years, the Otelo series. Yeah. We as a brand, Precision Hydration, partner with Otelo, but that's come largely out of a really positive association I've had with the guys, Mats and Michael there, and the whole organisation. Because what's great about that sport is it's kind of adventurous. It feels to me like triathlon did in the 90s. It's a bit new, it's a bit exciting. The other thing is, because you take biking out of the equation, the training volume's so much lower. So I can kind of compete a little bit on 5 or 6 hours of training a week, where that's not going to get you very far with triathlon. Mm-hmm. I've also I had a knee injury and knee surgery a few years ago, which limits my ability to run anyway. So I got into kayaking, and my business partner Johnny, who works in Precision Hydration as well, he's a very good international kayak paddler. So we've started racing together, doing a few events like that, and that's been a whole new game for me to get into. So surf ski racing, K1 paddling, K2 paddling, that's been good fun. So I do a bit of that at the moment. Yeah,
but it's just a competition for fun. Nothing too serious?
Well, it's always serious, isn't it, when you get on the line? But but it's relative to the level of training that you've put in.
I can imagine. All right, how can people get in touch with you if they want to, Andy?
Well, best place to start is with our website, precisionhydration.com. There's a free online version of our sweat test, which uses part of our algorithm there, and they can do that and get themselves a free hydration strategy anytime they like. We're on Twitter. We are at the Sweat Experts on Twitter. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Precision Hydration. And also, if they want to email us directly, if they send an email to hello@precisionhydration.com, that will make its way to me. We're a small little team based largely in the UK. We love interacting and talking to customers. So if anyone wants to ask us questions or get in touch, then hello@precisionhydration.com is a good email address to start with.
All right, cool. I'll put those links up on the show notes pages. So anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, actually, I think we've done a special code for your listeners, Peter, which is Junkie, all capital letters, and that will, if they use that on our website, it gives them a free box or tube of Precision Hydration to try. So you can, I think they pay for shipping, but not the product. So you can pop that in the cart on our website, precisionhydration.com, and get yourself a free box or tube of the products to give them a try.
All right, cool, awesome. Yeah, that's really, really useful. I'll put those links up as well on the show notes page. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries, much appreciated. One final question to finish it off there. If you could sit on a bench in a nice park in the UK there somewhere and chat for an hour with anyone from the past or the present, who would it be and why?
Ooh, God, that is a good question. Well, do you know what? It's not going to be anyone that anyone's heard of at this stage, but there was a guy called Mark Phillips. He was known as Foggy. He was he was a Royal Marine in the UK, and he, I believe, held the record, or certainly had one of the fastest ever times for a kayaking race that I'm doing soon, which is 125 miles from Devizes to Westminster, and he did it in about 15 hours, and he's a legend of that really kind of niche sport, like one of the hardest, toughest men. I met him when I was younger, and sadly he passed away quite young and quite unexpectedly, either earlier this year or at the back end of last year. But I would love to sit down with Foggy and chew the fat about how his mental toughness for doing these incredible events that no one's heard of, with no prize money and no glory other than a big sense of self-satisfaction at the end, because I'm about to launch into that next week.
No, okay, and that would have been an interesting chat. Yeah, unfortunately, it won't be able to happen. Well, good luck with the race anyway.
Thank you very much.
All right, and thanks so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Yeah, cheers, Peter. See you later.
All right, Junkies, you've reached the end of yet another episode of the Endurance Junkie podcast. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Andy for coming on. Now, every listen means so much to me, so if you like this interview and think someone else would too, feel free to share it on your own social media channels. That would be awesome and very much appreciated. Now, if you have suggestions for possible future guests, you can always shoot me an email to peter@junkiepodcast.com, and I'll try to make it happen. All right, thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time. Cheers.